Hi, I'd like to talk to you about the pedagogy and technology of having free-range learning, not stuck inside the silo of Moodle. If you're familiar with the Turing test, it's a way of telling whether or not you're dealing with a human or a computer. Online, a Turing test would be whether or not you're dealing with actual engaged students or students who are just doing the work because they have to, but aren't really part of a live and vibrant class. And the problem there is that if students aren't actually engaged, the only energy that they have for their work is what you give them through your assignments and what they do for their grades. But if they're engaged, they bring their own energy and their own enthusiasm. Much more can happen for them and for the class. When we begin looking at how instruction happens, the father of cognitivism and behaviorism is Robert Gagné, and I say Gagné with a spoon because students today don't want to have everything put right in front of them and said, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and have no agency and no socialization. We know that students love to socialize on online media, social networking, and that this gives a certain amount of energy, but only if that socialization is not forced. If you say to students, go and post on our discussion board and then respond to 2 posts, there may be just things done pro forma so they can get the grade, but it won't really kick. However, if you add learner agency, if you can actually get them to want to do something that comes from themselves and to share those things, then you have active learners and an active course, and that's what you want. The old-fashioned way of teaching is to stand in front of the room and lecture to the students, let them put their hands up and call on them, which is entirely teacher-directed. And the purpose of that is for the teacher to put information into the minds of students exactly the way the teacher wants. And hopefully the students' minds will be open to it. Now, the very opposite end of that is where students are on their own explorations. I think they do that way in England. They go and discover what they discover, and then at the very end, perhaps they get back and share what they did with the professor for a grade. And that can work when you have the culture for it. Full agency and full direction are ends of a spectrum, and in the middle you have guidance. And in guidance, the instructor asks the students questions, facilitates the discussion. The students are doing things from their own, but the knowledge is being scaffolded and supported by the professor. And that's really the sweet spot. That's the best place to hang out in as a class. You may go off into directed learning at times. You may go off into full agency. But you want to habituate yourself to a place where you're contributing and they're contributing. Now the question is, how do we make that happen inside Moodle? Bad Moodle is where you're stuck in using the software to run the instruction. Students look and see what they have to do. They do it. They say, okay, I'm done. Let me move on to the next week. Now you can run Moodle as a MOOC where students have topics and they go through them on their own. And hopefully there are enough students together on the same thing at the same time to get something happening. But the ideal space, again, is where people are in the same area at the same time, but they have some flexibility about what they're doing. That's where the active learning happens. Let's look at the lesson planning for this. Again, on the left is that frequently cited example. Teacher assigns a reading, the learners read it, maybe it's a case study, they reflect on the case study. The teacher grades their reflection posts, and the teacher also says, by the way, go and post on the forum, and then reply to 2 posts. Now, if I really wanted to make this social, the individuals would read the case study. The teacher would create some groups and assign students to those groups. Those groups would answer the questions in and among themselves using the relationships that are developing in the groups. The groups would present what they come up with as a teacher takes notes. Maybe it would be in a virtual classroom, or perhaps they'd made PowerPoints. Each of the groups is contributing socially constructed knowledge. And now the teacher summarizes the group's presentation, and everybody gets a chance to experience the differences in the approach. But that was a very, again, directed experiment. The groups were all controlled by the teacher. The assignments were controlled by the teacher. Now let's go back and look at autonomy. There's the old style one. We looked at that before, and I'm viewing that the forum posts and comments are really, I'm striking them out because they're not going to be very real when they're always forced, and particularly when a teacher doesn't respond inside the forums, which I've seen happen very often, or when what happens in the forums is never brought back into the flow of the classroom, which I always see. If you could do that, if you could actually respond to the forums and then do some kind of a video at the beginning of your next class in which you describe what you saw and suggest ways to move together, that would allow me to take those strike-throughs off. But on the autonomous side, you would assign a case and a product rubric that says whatever it is that you make, here are some things it needs to address. The learners are going to select another reading in addition to the case study. That is a filter, a way to interpret it. And they'll select how they're going to analyze it. What are they going to put together? And they're going to select what are they going to make. They share what they make with the class, and the teacher grades the work based on that rubric. Again, it's individual, but the individual has an incredible amount of control over what they're doing. And because they like to work with certain material and they like to think certain ways, this is what constructivism would say is the best way to go forward, the sort of individual side of constructivism. Now, social also has directed and autonomous forms. Social directed form is what I described 2 slides ago. Social autonomous, the learners would form their own groups. Hard to do with Moodle. The members of the groups would find case studies of their own or interpretive readings of their own and share that with the other members of their small groups. The groups would create online presentations of some kind together, share those presentations with the class. Individuals perhaps would review and comment on 3 of the group presentations, and then the class with the teacher would discuss all of their comments. Now those comments and reviews would take place in a discussion board, but at this point that's a very live discussion board. Groups want to see what other people thought of them. Individuals want to see how other people are responding. That's a lot of work, and you don't do that with every assignment, but you can imagine how that would really make your class alive. The question is, how could you do that with Moodle? Some people view Moodle as a hub, where lots of different kinds of activities can take place. It's seen as something sort of freeing and open. Others view it as a silo, because the only people you can interact with are the other people in the course. And the only materials that you work with are materials that disappear when the course is over, because they're linked to from inside a course that you don't have access to afterwards. And the students that you find are going to disappear also, because if you don't go and find all their contact information, you won't have access to who was the person last week who said that thing, or last year. The discussions go away week by week. The next week, you don't care about the previous week's discussions. So I'm going to suggest that Moodle is more like a hub inside a silo. Lots of things can happen, but they're bounded. And because they're bounded, there's only so much investment that an individual is going to put into them. You could do it another way and make it a silo at the center of a hub. You have all these bounded things, but the teacher says, hey, go out to one of these other communities, have an interaction there, bring that back to the class by commenting and posting and sharing the story of what you're doing. But those interactions stay. Those ones that are out there stay, and they build something for you, for yourself, and for your connections to the real world. There's a lot of them to pick: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm going to suggest that Google Plus would be the best way to move forward if your college supports Google apps, because it means that all of your students have a Google Plus identity that they can build and they can take with them afterwards if you let students keep their Gmail accounts. And since Gmail accounts are free, why not do it? So the learning management system is a silo. The virtual classroom, like Illuminate or Wimba, is also a silo, because the only people who can participate in that conversation are people who are in that class. The learning content management system is a hub. This is where you put content outside of your class and then link to it from the class. But that content is public and people can find it later. How do you make breadcrumbs to help them find it later? It depends on the learning content management system that you use. If we used Google for this, you might have a Google site where you link to Google documents that are for each of your classes, or just that are yours and that a student knows that professor did that, I want to go and find that work that he did. Or maybe you would put up a hyperlinked bibliography for each class, but put that on your website so they can come to it later. And then the social learning environment, which is also the hub, would be those network connections of students who are befriending each other through Google+, creating circles. And again, if you don't use Google Plus for this, you could use LinkedIn for it. It would work the same, except that it's nice to have a minimal number of logins and a lot of shared reference points, and not every student would be on LinkedIn, and you don't control LinkedIn if you're in university. So let's talk about the differences between a learning management system and a learning content management system a little bit more in depth. Your learning management system is really good for managing the flow of work that happens in a class, managing what each individual student does, seeing where they've participated, and evaluating their progress. It's not very good at maintaining content because you have to edit something. If you have 3 sections of a course, you have to go to each section and make changes when you want to make changes. But more importantly, nothing extends outside the course. And whenever you make a new course, you've got to go and import that content into each course. Now, the difference between a learning management system and a social learning environment is between that directed and autonomous. When students are posting in a Moodle forum, they know those posts are going to go away. The relationships that they make with each other are going to go away. If you don't mind that, it works very well. But if you want that autonomy, you want students to want to develop relationships that will stay, and you want them to be able to work together in ways that aren't always bounded by exactly what you've given them in the assignment. You want them to have real exchanges where they're saying, hey, I want to build a relationship with this person based on they're interested in this and I'm interested in this, and let's be able to reference that. And build their identities and communities of practice, because it's possible that when they leave the college, their Google Plus relationships will lead them into people they've contacted before in the real world. And if it turns out that if they happen to be doctors and the doctors that they've connected to don't use Google Plus, but have some other network that they use, the practice that they've had with Google Plus, with creating networks, will come in good stead with them. So in summation, you have your learning management system where you do the grading, course management things, and where the kind of structure of the learning that you're directing happens. You have your learning content management system where the content is developed and shared and published so students can use it as learning objects and come back to it after the course is over. And you have a social learning environment where teachers and students can freely interact before and after the course, and where people are establishing professional and academic identities that they will bring with them. And it happens that Google Apps for Education can serve both as a social learning environment and as a learning content management system, and is thus ideally paired with Moodle for a freer range learning experience for your students. Thank you.